Volvo is the last automotive manufacturer left in Sweden, and by definition the only car maker that can create authentic Scandinavian design. Today, Volvo makes some of the best designs and most elegant cars in the world, and they've been doing it for decades. So what's the secret? It all comes down to the core values of the brand and its solid foundation in Scandinavian lifestyle and design. And this innovative design strategy called Scandinavian design was first introduced in the 1940s, and it combined beauty, simplicity, and functionality into one package. The Bauhaus movement is an example of how Scandinavian architecture has been influenced by the idea of functionality for a very long time. And the harsh climates of Northern Europe has long influenced Scandinavians to prioritize utility and simplicity over decoration and simply styling. Volvo, they took this design philosophy and fully embraced it from the company's inception. Have there been some crazy Volvo concepts over the years? Absolutely, and I love that. But most of them have still focused on key Volvo values such as safety, usability, and new drivetrain technologies. Maybe not so much the Volvo T6 Roadster concept from 2006, which was so completely different from what you would expect from Volvo, and that's also what I think makes it even more cool. Now, there's no denying that the new Volvo EX90 is a stunning SUV. It takes the already gorgeous XC90 and simplifies it even more using math, because the EX90 was designed using the Fibonacci formula. This is one of the most famous formulas in mathematics. Each number in the sequence is the sum of the two numbers that came before it, and it's a pattern that's very common in nature as well. And when visualized, it creates lines and curves that have been used for centuries as a template for beautiful compositions and proportions. And this is the exact same approach the Volvo's design team used when they sketched up the new EX90. What I want to do in this video is show you the design sketches of the EX90, but before we do that, let's go back in time just a little bit, back to the mid-80s or something like that, when the 240 was Volvo's flagship model. And we have that up here. This is the station wagon, the 245. And I absolutely love these cars, because these cars, to me, they were a big part of my childhood growing up in Sweden. I remember these cars. This was actually the first car that I ever drove. My dad let me drive this car. I was sitting in his lap, and I held the steering wheel and driving around in wintertime. It was so much fun. But look at this design. We still have the same philosophy back then, or today, like we had back then, with simple lines, functionality above anything else. You can see this is basically a block or two boxes that are put together to create this design. Simple design, and this was built as a tank as well. The 200 series, you know, if you go 200,000 miles, it's barely broken in, and they're known to last forever as long as you just take care of them, and also manages the harsh Swedish winters very well. Now look at the V90 down here from 2022. We still have the same philosophy, and that's what I love about Volvo. They haven't strayed away from the original design philosophy of simplicity and functionality, but it's a lot more elegant these days. They've added an aspect of elegance to this design. This looks almost like a military vehicle, the 200 series, but now we do have some styling in this approach from the 2022 model, even though the philosophy, the core values are still exactly the same as we had back in the 80s. And that's what's built Volvo up as one of the brands that has one of the strongest brand identities in the industry. Looking at the sketches for the new EX90, just have a look at this beautiful collage of sketches. This is something that I wouldn't mind having up on my wall as just simply just as art. I love these type of sketches because these are the initial sketches that shows the idea, the early concept, and the early proportions and line flow of the design. And you can see that he took inspiration from yachts. So this is the type of yacht that I would be sketching every day, all day when I was in design school. This exact shape. I love this design. I think it's super clean and simplistic, and it looks beautiful. When you look at it in the ocean, on the water, it looks like almost part of the overall scenery. It doesn't stick out too much. So they took these two lines and implemented that in an SUV form, meaning having two almost parallel lines creating the entire width or length of the body, and within that reduce the amount of styling features in the design. And when you do this in combination with the Fibonacci formula, which I'm gonna show you in just a second how they applied that onto the EX90, you get something that is naturally beautiful. Having that applied onto a car almost by default makes it a beautiful car. This is also a beautiful sketch right here. We have this line creating a sharp shoulder line, and I love that they put out the wheels massive here to plant this sketch. And we have some new graphic features in the rear end, which we're gonna have a look at in more detail right here in this more of a rendered sketch. You can see that we have big wheels here as well, and this is how you visualize sketches in the design phase. You want to emphasize the key graphic features, and you want to plant the sketch, and that's what they did here as well. We have three key lines. We have this line at the bottom, then we have this line right above it, and then we have the shoulder line. All lines wrap around the car, creating a very strong, tight looking package. The interior of the new EX90 is a 7-seater, so this is the layout, and I love this sketch as well. This is definitely something I would like to just hang up on my wall because this is simply a piece of art. Then we have the interior, moving down to the displays that we have right here. As I said in my previous video when I talked about the EX90 when it was first launched, I would rather have a housing for the gauge cluster, as I'm sure you know by now, and I would rather have it look more like the current XC90 design, because that feels more like a cozy interior that you want to sit in for a long time instead of having two sterile separated screens like we have here. It creates more of a medical approach to the interior. This is where the magic comes in with the new EX90, and this is the Fibonacci formula visualized in curves and squares. You can see that they even added this point right here at the very highest point of this curvature, and from this point you now have the angles for the greenhouse, such as the A, B, C, and D pillars. They all stem from this single point up here, and you can see that the proportions also follow this golden ratio, as it's called when it's used in art. And the wheelbase is exactly 3 wheels wide, visualized by these circles, and we have the key lines put out here as well in the car. It's just a beautiful way to design a car, and this, if you want to have an example of how to design products well, I think this image here visualizes it very clearly, how you can use math and nature to come up with something stunning, such as the EX90 design. Looking at the front view of the EX90, it's an evolution from the XC90 design, very much cleaned up in the front end because it is an EV, and we have some very high-tech headlights, but we still have these lines intact all around the body, and I think that just creates almost like a tight ribbon around this car and adding a lot of tension to this design while still keeping it very simple. I think this is my favorite view of the new EX90. I love the graphics in the rear because this is also an evolution from the XC90, but it's a lot more simplified here, and they're also separated. So we have a different graphic treatment up here than we have in the bottom, and I think that creates more interest. It's more interesting to look at this because now we have more design features to look at that doesn't really have a connection to each other, but at the same time the whole package creates a very congruent design in combination with these gorgeous lines and line flow that we have all around the car. You can see here, I think this is a good view where you can see how these lines graphically help this SUV look slimmer. This is like the waistline going in and creates more of a athletic look for this design and removes some of the mass from the lower part and also plants the design better, in my opinion, specifically with these big wheels. Last but not least, this is the interior. I think it's a clean looking interior. Talking about Scandinavian design, simplicity, functionality, it has all that, but I think what's lacking here is what they took from the 240 to the V90. They didn't add that feeling of elegance to the interior that I would like to see, and that we already have in the XC90, that I think they could just update a little bit and implement in the EX90 as well.